Yes.
What was the most complex scene in this movie from a puppeteering standpoint?
Well, really, pretty much every scene. It's my dad approached this movie as wanting it always, everything to be like an illusion and things aren't what they seem. And that's, that great scene where the camera is looking at the rocks and the rocks look like David's face and then they scoot over to the side. The way that was made was amazing. An artist came in, he had a piece of glass up and on the glass he had sketched David's face, and then he put a viewfinder behind that, and he would look through the viewfinder, and then he'd go out and start sculpting rocks, and he'd go back and he'd sculpt the rocks all in the different layers so that it looked like it from that one spot. It looked like David, but when you rolled off, it wasn't. And so there are lots of really complicated scenes. The giant guard was pretty complicated, but he doesn't. What he's doing is not that complicated. Bog of Eternal Stench really was that. It really was really hard to work, and it was so slippery because it was all goopy and it bubbled, and it really did, something grew in there, so it really did stink. And in those days, the film speed was like 50 ASA, so it was hot as hell with lights. And I remember at one point, it was so slippery, and it was all about this deep. And at one point, the first AC was carrying, one of those big Panavision cameras, which at the time were like $300,000 each. And he was walking, and there's one section of the bog that had to be deep enough for the piston rocks to go up and down. So there's one section of the bog that was a tank in the stage. But it had chains, the chain tackles down so that people would know where it was. But the first AC wasn't aware of that, and he just walked right off the edge with this camera, and it was so slippery, and the chain was covered with the goop, and he just grabbed a hold of it, and he just lifted the camera up with one hand, and then he slid down the chain with one hand holding the chain, the other holding the camera, until he was all the way underwater, and one of the other ACs grabbed the camera right before it went. But the poor guy was fully under the Bog of Stench. That was real complex. The truth is, it really was. My dad loved challenging the impossible. The idea of a wireless character in Hoggle that could just walk around and do all that at that time was just absolutely impossible. So the idea of Hoggle in general was kind of like an impossible thing to imagine at that time.
Were there times when you actually had someone inside Hoggle?
Always.
Always. And when you were using the close-ups, though.
Always. We did a test. I think there's one shot that is a hand puppet Hoggle, and we realized the way he moves, which we used on the first day for a close-up, and it's in there because my dad never reshoots anything, but the way he moved, it just wasn't quite. It didn't quite match, and Shari Weiser, she's 3'2", she was inside it, and we thought we would use the hand puppet for close-ups, but the quality of movement was just impossible to get the anatomy of your hand to match the anatomy of her inside. So the movement will always look like a little bit of a mismatch. So in the end, it was her all the time, and the way she could see, the way we planned for her to see, which was the whole head is all fully radio controlled. That had to go through like 8 transmitters to handle the number of channels. But then she had a camera in her stomach that was hidden in the costume, and she had a viewfinder on both eyes, I think it was, inside. And we started working with that, and she immediately got sick, because she would turn her head, the view wouldn't change, she'd have to turn to see. And so there was we were really concerned with, we don't know what to do with it. So in the end, there's no interior in the mouth. Originally, there was an interior, but there's nothing in there now. It's black in the movie. And her face is back there. And she can only see when his eyes are open. So, when his mouth is open, it's the only time she can see. So people would say to me, I really like what you did with the voice of Hoggle, how he's always going, he can't shut up. I just love that. And I was like, yeah, because that was the only way Sherry could see. So it's the way we would shoot. Hoggle would be walking along and he wouldn't have any dialogue. It would be Jennifer, who would be speaking, but Hoggle would be heading right for a tree, so he'd have to go, "Ah!" So he had to like make ridiculous noises all the time, or he'd walk on off of cliffs and into trees. But
I was really surprised. I was quite young when this movie came out, so I was really surprised seeing as it has such a huge following now, and so many people love this movie that it wasn't a big hit at the time.
well, I think it and Dark Crystal, our second viewings are better, and I say that about a lot of my movies. Like I'm in the two Muppet movies I directed, Muppet Christmas Carol. The story is so strong that the first viewing can be the best. Thank you. I know, I'm proud of that one. I like that one. But Muppet Treasure Island, the story's not as good. Thank you. But Muppet Treasure Island, scene for scene, is kind of it's more clever. So Treasure Island gets better on the second viewing when you're no longer watching for the story. When you've seen, the story, now you're watching the movie a second time. And I think Labyrinth is one of those. I think the first time you watch it, when it's the story that's compelling you through, it's not as strong as when you're watching it for the filmmaking and for the characters and for specific moments. I think it's stronger that way. And I think that's probably why it wasn't very strong. But if you look at its lifetime grosses and stuff like that, I mean, it actually is an enormous commercial success. It just didn't do one of these gigantic wipeout weekends to start.
Yeah, we had Carrie Elwes down here with The Princess Bride, which is another film that, oddly, given its sort of cherished status, was not a massive success upon its release. And part of the thought is that home video really created a new generation of film viewers that were able to watch things again and again and again, and suddenly these movies became, a classic.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's also, if a film was very unique, it's hard for it to be a huge, huge hit, And Princess Bride was very unique when it was made. I know Ridley Scott's Legend. I love Legend. It didn't do very well to start with, but but it's because it's so unique.
Yeah. Well, what's your favorite moment in this movie?
Wow, I ought to know. I don't really know. I don't know. I really have such a fond memory of all of it, and there's so many different aspects to it. Some of the big goblin scenes, I so loved just figuring out these big crowded scenes with all sorts of stuff going on. But then some of the little scenes, like Sarah and Hoggle and the oubliette, I really enjoyed doing the Shaft of Hands. It's because it's such a unique little. And then the little scenes like the knockers, that was so easy. That was like, let's just shoot it, boom, it was done. It was like in an hour. It was like, and it's one of the greatest moments in the movie. But it was super easy to shoot. One of the few easy ones. I love the little guy who turns the stones. That's one of our puppeteers. That's Mac Wilson. And, we built a giant stone. And in those days, compositing was not happening in those days. They were opticals. They didn't look good. So for there to be a shot of the ground and one of the rocks comes up and a little guy shaking his fist turns the rock over and goes back down, that set was bigger than this theater, just to do that shot,
And did you have to do something similar with the worm?
The worm was forced perspective, which is probably what you would assume. Jennifer, lots and lots of light, ASA 50 at the time, super hot set to get the depth of field. But Jennifer was close to the camera against a brick wall, and then, the other way around. The worm was close to the camera, and with miniature bricks, and then Jennifer was another 30 feet back. Wow! And you can if you look at it again, you can pretty much guess where the line is because the depth of field isn't a perfect match, but it's still a darn good illusion. But it was Jennifer was way back from the camera No, I did have it right. No, it's the other way around because No, I did have it right because the worm was a hand puppet, was a full-size hand puppet. Jennifer's close to the camera, and the worm is further back and is a full-size hand puppet. There is 1 or 2 shots where it's a tiny little worm that's not doing much, and that was for a wide shot where she's running past, so that in case once the audience thinks they've figured out that it's forced perspective, then she does a move that makes you think, oh well, it can't have been forced perspective because we built it both ways, and we did have a tiny worm just for her exit and entrance, so that you would assume it couldn't have been forced perspective. But then it was forced perspective, and it was a full size. The worm was this big, and was on a wall that was further back. Jennifer was the one close to the camera. I did have it right first time. Jennifer was close to the camera on normal size bricks, and then further away were large bricks and the hand puppet worm.